to be recording the conversation, the questions, and then we're going to try to put that in a transcript, because I think that will be very helpful for anyone not necessarily following every session when we go out there. To have a summary of presentations and questions, I think will be a good place in our appendix, and when we do our report, where there might be a nice concise way to get every group's opinions. So I just kind of wanted to let you know that's what's going on, and please take the time to read those and come up with questions around them. Anything else, Dr. T?
Yes, Steve, big picture. So what we're doing is we're trying to make sure that each group has a full understanding of the school resource officer program. And it's all about point of view. School resource officers have a certain point of view because they're living the role. School administrators, principals, and vice principals have a different perspective because they have different jobs and they work with school resource officers. School staff, they're not one group because you have some office staff who see the school resource officers working in one way, and classroom teachers and support staff maybe in another way. Certainly we have students who see things from a different point of view. Some students have had experience with school resource officers, some not. Parents, the same thing. You might hear from your students about an experience or not with school resource officers. So what we're trying to do in these question and answer sessions is level the information and making sure that people have a fuller range of information, which is why we've given questions to each role group and had those role groups present. And as Steve said last time, we had the administrators present, and then each subgroup had a chance to ask specific questions. And Renee, I think we left off with you, and I didn't know if you had finished. We're not trying to rush you. You might have had some reflections, but we want to make sure that all of the questions that the parents had for the administrators were answered. And then following the parents, we would go to Christina. Waited an amazingly long time last time, and I don't know if she's here tonight. But Renee, why don't you pick it up, and we'll try to finish the administrators tonight and get into the staff.
I think that was everything. Okay. If there's another parent that has something else to add, then that's fine. But I think that's all I had written down.
Okay, fair enough.
So if there are none, I think what we'd like to do is let's hit breakouts. So staff, you could kind of organize for a quick 10 minutes at the most. People can go over and prepare their questions. So Tim, is there going to be an order of after the presentation who asked the questions? Do you have a sequence of that?
You know, actually I do.
Okay.
And that's a great question, because we want to make sure that the order I wrote down, I sort of tried to keep in the same order, is the parents would be up first, followed by students, followed by school resource officers, followed by board, followed by administration. So when it comes time for each same role group to have a discussion leader, make sure that you have your discussion leader ready tonight to ask staff questions. The other thing is that staff spent a lot of time answering questions, putting answers in writing. So make sure you review what they put in writing. And I think that was an attachment. So make sure you've downloaded that and refreshed your memory about what staff answered from the 2 meetings ago.
You know, let me do this before I send you guys to breakout rooms. Let me pull that link up and put it in chat. Okay. So it'll be easy for everybody. So we're talking about the questions that the staff put together, right?
Yes.
Give me a second. Okay.
And also, since there is a transcript from the administrator's presentation last time, make sure that if your group is going to be asking follow-up questions to administrators, that you refresh your memory on those questions also. we're leaving it to each group to make sure that the questions that you asked of the administrators or the staff are addressed.
A second, looks like I had something wrong on my clipboard. Please don't need to see the Zoom for the administrators meeting. Hold on a second, where am I at? Go back, staff, get shovel link, here we go.
While Steve's doing that, would 10 minutes, I'm just doing a time check, would 10 minutes to refresh your memories be sufficient in breakout so that we maximize the Q&A? Just give me a head nod or a side-by-side, 10 minutes? Okay.
Okay, we'll try that. If staff, you need more time to organize your presentation, we want to make sure you have that. Okay, and so let me know if the link doesn't work, if I threw it in chat, if you haven't seen the staff's response to previously. Come out of the breakout rooms if you have any questions, and here we go. All right, everybody, we're coming back from break. Let me see if everyone has landed. We're back to 29 participants. Very good. Okay. So who was going to be the spokesperson for the staff and do a presentation? I swear I heard it was Lynette.
I will do that.
Okay, great, Charlie.
Okay. So our goal is to enhance an invaluable program through our insight as staff members who work day to day with the SROs, students, teachers, and admin. We can offer an end of the SROs interactions actually work on site. We have come to agree through this process that we would feel less safe without SROs on campus, and the idea of calling a beat officer in lieu of our SRO can potentially create different stress factors. We've reached a consensus that the SROs should be clearly identifiable in their uniform and armed while on campus. We would like to see many of the same improvements to the MOU and to the program as a whole, which has been outlined by the admin team. We would like to see more of a team approach. We would like our school communities to be familiar with their SROs and know how to contact them easily. We would like to see our SROs use their own personalities, creativity, and knowledge to lead our students and staff by example. We're hopeful that the SROs can spend more time in classrooms teaching students about various topics. Some of those would be their student rights, or gang-related situations, or drugs and how to combat those things that they come across on the day-to-day. We think it is important to establish much clearer expectations and roles of our SROs, as well as enhance clearer communication and involvement with our entire community. We would like the board and the district office to support in creating a safe and viable community with the SROs and our families and staff. Programs that further involve students and staff and families, such as giving a family night, such as giving parents information about gangs or drugs and how to talk to their students or recognize signs that are important. We would like to see the SROs weaved into our elementary schools in a meaningful way to support and create these communities early. We would also like to see and have some ideas of some sort of a community or a committee safety program to track how this program is progressing on a regular basis. We feel this would be an easy thing to instigate through Google Sheets or Google Forms. You can send out a Google form to the students at the end of every quarter or even at the end of every semester, so that it would be the students are getting their report cards and so are our SROs. It can be something simple about what their current interactions with their SROs were. That can all be sent to district or to the sergeant that needs to be. And that information can add transparency to the families when it just says, this quarter your SRO did a fantastic job, or this quarter your SRO encountered these things and we will be discussing more about that. These would be simple add-ins. Thank you.
Great. Can you go through summaries of some of the key questions that were asked of staff?
I do not have those pulled up. Lynette, do you have those easily available to you?
I can get them in a second.
Okay.
I also just wanted to add that we talked a lot about how SROs work well with our students when they're in a mental health crisis and when there's a 5150 involved, that it really helps students to have that familiar face of the SRO when they're dealing with a crisis like that. So that's something that we think is very useful as far as the SRO program.
And we were also at, sorry, Tim, go ahead.
Charlie, I was just going to say, can you share with the ad hoc committee what roles are represented in the staff group? Because I think it's a broad perspective, and sometimes that might help everybody understand the views that you're bringing forward. Like I see that Blair is a school counselor. Charlie, what role do you play?
I am in attendance.
Attendance?
Mm-hmm. Lynette is our health tech.
Okay.
And Ola, I believe, is also a counselor.
No, Ola's a teacher. She's
Oh, Ola's a teacher. I'm sorry.
At the middle level.
At the mid-
and we had two other people who aren't here tonight. One's a teacher at Cesar Chavez, and one is a student advisor at Comstock.
Right.
And they're both not here tonight.
I just think it helps to know you're bringing these lenses together when you're making these conclusions. So thank you.
And each of you, could you add your school sites? A question was in chat. So Ola, what school?
Rincon
Charlie.
Valley Middle.
Okay.
And
Casey,
Lynette and I both are from Santa Rosa High School.
Okay.
And I'm a counselor at Slater Middle School. I was at Santa Rosa High for a long time. And then, yeah, Cesar Chavez is one of the teachers. And then I think it was Cook Middle School.
Oh,
But
sorry. Yeah,
Yeah.
Mhm.
right.
as a student advisor.
Yes, Anthony.
You have a broad perspective then.
I do.
Thank you.
Very good. Okay. Okay, so what's
I
the
have a-
order?
I have
Sorry.
the questions here. I don't know what you want me to do with those, Tim, but I have them in front of me.
I think it's useful to make them visual. If we could share those, Steve.
You want to try share your screen, or do you want me to pull them up and let it?
Let me see if I can
Sure,
do it.
Tim.
No pressure.
I can't share my screen, I don't think, with you.
Hold on just a second.
While we're waiting on that, one other thing that we talked a lot about was, making sure that our students feel safe and comfortable. And so that is why we were discussing continuing to have committees around the SROs, maybe site committees as well as a district-wide committee. Maybe the site committee could meet, monthly or quarterly, and then the district committee could come all together, a couple times a year to just kind of see what's working well at other sites, what can be improved, what can we incorporate.
Okay. So I think that what we can do is I have the parents going first, and I don't know if Renee, you're leading the parent question, but if you want me to scroll toward any question that the staff addressed, I can move the screen to that question. So Renee, are you leading the parent questions, or was that passed off to someone?
Well, usually the parents are a little off track in our outbreak sessions, but
You're
Not-
confessing.
so we started going through this, but we didn't compile a list of questions. So if any questions came up for parents, they're either welcome to send them to me in chat and I can ask them, or we can ask one at a time. One of the questions that I know has come forward is asking which schools each of you represent.
Okay.
Get the answer for that then, Renee? Are you good? You clear?
Yes.
So then to the parents in general, there were a lot of written answers given. And are there specific questions that any parents had for the staff in regard to the questions that they addressed?
I had a question.
Yes, go ahead, Mark.
I was looking through the answers that they had given there, and I was just curious, I guess, what happens from a staff and the teacher standpoint when there's a disruptive or a defiant student who refuses to comply with what they're requesting, such as, I just throw an example out there, like if someone's just vaping in class and refuses to stop vaping in class, how is that handled if the SRO is not on campus versus when the SRO is on campus?
I can answer that. Maybe we can all answer it. Go ahead.
You know, when, Mark, when that happens, and being for real, it does happen from time to time, that teacher will normally will say something to the student, and then we will not send them out of classroom to go to the main office. We in turn will call that main office. There's a special number that we have, and they know when that phone goes off and I'm in room 91, if I call and say, room 91, I need you now, they're there. So that kid with the possession of that tool will be walked down to the main office by one of the administrators. And then they in turn will handle, because it states in the student guide, the do's and don'ts. But that's a good question.
It is a good question. I can add to, but the perspective that I've seen in high school, which is that if a teacher's having that kind of a situation with a student, she'll call either her admin or to our student advisor, who will go to the classroom and retrieve the student and bring the student to one of the vice principal's office. The vice principal will discipline the student. It wouldn't generally involve a vaping incident, wouldn't generally involve an SRO. The admin team they have clear repercussions for those type of offenses. I would guess it's probably like a detention or call home or take the vaping, I don't know. You'd have to ask admin what their specific is, but it wouldn't, in my experience, involve an officer, whether they were on campus or whether they weren't on campus.
Okay, yeah, that was my follow-up. Is it, I guess, just admin normally handles everything, and then they're the ones who decide whether or not to involve an SRO, correct?
Yeah, and just for a vaping incident, I mean, I'm sorry to say, but that's not uncommon in a high school. So that's, yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah.
I have a question. I'd like to know what the level of restorative justice training is for each of you, and how you feel that's either supported by SROs or in conflict with SROs.
I'll
So that's-
go off.
That's toward the staff, right, you guys? Right, Renee? Right?
Yes.
Okay.
Renee, I've had training years ago, and then I had some training probably 4 or 5 years ago at Pioneer, when we were going through that process of doing the circles and all the things that go around with that. Fortunately or unfortunately, I haven't had that experience at Rincon. We don't have the big circle. Some of the teachers will do things in their classrooms to handle the situation if it's something small. If it's a huge situation, such as threatening another student or a teacher, then that involves the bigger circle. And a lot of time the counselors will come down to that room when they're having the circles and deal with the issue there.
And I can say a little bit too, maybe Blair, the others can too, but we have restorative specialists. I'm not sure if you're familiar with that, but the district high, so yeah, you know, it sounds like, so they handle, in my experience, they handle the circles and they put the circles together, you know, based on each incident, they put the circles together and invite the people who should be in the circle or who are affected by the incident. And I have sat in circles before. I've been trained in circles. And I've sat in circles with SROs before, as well as with family members, with the student, with other staff members like that. I'm not sure if that answers your question entirely, but the staff as a whole, the district has put us through restorative training through the restorative center. I'm sorry, I don't remember the name of it, in Los Angeles. So they've spent several years now sending handfuls of people down, at first hundreds of people, but now handfuls of people down there to get trained in restorative.
So parents, just to add on that, so a restorative specialist is a classified position. We have one at every high school that's full-time, and they're shared every 2 days or so, Blair, at the middle schools, right? Couple, like every other day and every Friday or whatever.
Yes.
Yeah. And so those people are highly trained on restorative practices. It can be a referral model. Classroom teachers, administrators can refer students there. Students can self-refer. And they're also there to help support teachers if they want to do restorative work in their room. These restorative specialists are on campus, and that's how they support. Okay. Other questions, parents?
Yes, I have a question. Actually, so can you guys give me the list of behaviors that requires to call the SRO?
Did you ask which behaviors require an SRO?
Yes.
Well, that would be up to, as far as I'm concerned, that would be up to our admin team, usually a vice principal or principal that would decide that. But it's, how shall I say, escalated behaviors, behaviors that are maybe dangerous to that student or to others. Yeah, probably that's the overarching.
Could we have an administrator jump in and maybe help add to?
Any administrator want to jump in?
Tim, how about you?
Sure. Generally, an SRO is only brought in when there is an instance where a legal code outside of the school has been violated, and there's a demonstrative danger that we have ascertained. So, I mean, if we were to go back to the vapes, you know, a student with one vape probably would not rise to the level of involving an SRO. But if we were to find a student who has an entire backpack full of 50 vapes and a bunch of cash, that might be something that we would refer to the SRO to assist us on, because that likely is somebody who's selling on our campus. So it really does depend on the situation. But generally speaking, discipline in the classroom is best handled at tier 1. So that's between the teacher and the student. If it can't be handled at that level, then generally it's handled with a student advisor or an administrator. But our aim more and more over the last 2 to 3 years with restorative is to find out from the student, what were they thinking at the time? Can we ascertain, you know, can we separate the behavior from who the student is? Because students will make mistakes. They will act in poor judgment. And the last thing that we want to do is to separate them from school. So that's usually something that is more left up to the student. If they get to a point where they're so upset or so angry, then it might be appropriate to have them take a break from the class, or maybe even go home for the day. And then we come back and we restart. And that's sort of where our restorative support, you know, our restorative justice personnel comes in and works with the student to kind of walk them back through that day. Once again, kind of asking them after the fact, hey, what were you thinking? What were you thinking when you were, you know, leaning over in class and smoking? You know, what was going on for you? And sometimes what we find from the student is they weren't they weren't intentionally trying to do something negative. Maybe that's when we found out they're super stressed out and there's all this stuff going on in their life, and they just, are reacting to that. So a lot of times we try and look at what's happening in a discipline situation. First, we want to de-escalate it. First, we want to make sure everybody is safe. Sometimes the SRO plays a role in that, but oftentimes at what we consider that low-level discipline, it's a lot better if it can be taken care of by the teacher, or we can take care of it pretty quickly in the office and try and get that student back on their day. When we can't do that, then we need to involve parents, maybe take a break for the day, come back, try again. So that is sort of our progressive levels of student support.
Kim, I have a clarifying question for you. You use the term tier, T-I-E-R, and that's a very specific term. How many tiers are there that you use in Santa Rosa?
Generally, there's 3 tiers of intervention.
And tier 1 represents that local, the people closest to the student try to solve the problem, the classroom teacher. And so it's basically a system. This is not something that's random.
No, there is some randomness when you're dealing with students, because certain students, they connect with different people on campus. So for instance, I'll pick out Miss Lynette Casey. She has a really good connection with many, many kids. And sometimes when those kids are, having a hard time at tier 1, they're getting derailed, a quick check-in with her a lot of times can get them back on track. Now they may have done a couple of things. Maybe they've cussed somebody out. Maybe they were, maybe they did have a vape on them. We always have to try and ascertain what's the lowest level of intervention that we want to take to try and get a student back on track.
Okay, thank you. Yep. Okay, so now we're back to parents who are asking questions of staff.
Monica, I see you have your hand. And on the screen here, just let everybody know, I don't have the view of everybody, so you might have to use the little icon thing to raise your hand, or just, do a cough or something so I can, you pop up to speaker view.
I can't see either. I can only see the screen.
No, it's okay. But I am monitoring the hands. If you do put your hands up, Dr. T, I'm looking for those.
Okay, great.
So my question is sort of a accumulation of listening to the admins last week, and then the staff this week, and then the admin, Dr. Clissold, just providing some context. And, the referencing to the tier structure is great. And one of the kind of questions that I still had lingering in my mind from last week was about, as we move forward, doing things differently, because we definitely heard stories, whether anecdotal or not, where this tier structure was not honored. And then the lack of disclosure of the involvement of the SROs in the student handbook, in the Santa Rosa Schools handbook, where it lists the rights and it lists the rules, and it talks about restorative justice, but nowhere in that handbook is the SRO program mentioned, or when an officer might be brought in, to consult and have contact with the students. And so I'm really looking for some structure to all of this, and as a product of this committee, and so my question is, would you be willing to put that structure into language, referencing the tiers with guidelines and best practices, so that people have something to reference if they feel that it is not being honored, or that it escalated to the police too quickly, or that the police were being weaponized or used as a means of intimidation of students?
Monica, we're addressing questions to the staff.
Yeah, I realize that, but like I said, it was kind of an accumulation question for, I would say, both the staff and the admin and everyone really involved. It's really an open question to all parties involved to put more structure to how the SROs, the expectations of the program. And I see Lynette wants to.
Yeah, I can't answer all of that. Of course, that's not anything that I do, but I see things. And I think that that would be something that is really important, Monica. And I think that's what the staff is asking for as well. The structure, the clarity, I think that's a good place to put the SRO's contact information for the staff, for the parents and the kids, all of it. I think that the bigger question that you asked would probably need to be directed by the admin and the district office and the board and the SROs, the police as a whole, to put that together and get it into, properly into the handbook. But I think that's an amazing way to get this started, and even, all of it. Yeah, I think that's a great place to put it.
Monica, can you, just to make sure that we have your comments memorialized, I can't see the chat box, but could you definitely put all that in the chat box? That way, when we capture the chat notes, I think we've seen it before, but seeing it more than once is a good indicator. So great ideas.
Okay, thank you.
And Tim has the hand up. Go ahead, Tim.
Yeah, thank you, Steve. And just directly in response to Monica's kind of thinking and kind of question and request, I mean, my first thing was I was just nodding my head like that makes a lot of sense. I think we talked a lot about clarity. I want to connect Monica's question back to what we heard in a previous question about what brings an SRO into a situation. We could get into a sticky wicket or a little bit of a pickle because you might have a student who has a great relationship with the SRO. They might be brought in at a lower tier as a support, as we heard referenced, like, instead of using the health technician. So, and I know that there would be trust given to administrators to make those judgments when that's appropriate. But I was thinking about, when did an SRO come into student situations with me when I was a principal at Pioneer High School for 4 years, and then previously to that in other roles. So a total of about 8.5 years at Pioneer High School. And I would say tons of times, but they always knew that they were invited in, and I was invited in when it was a coaching model or a supportive model, and a student was having a situation that might require them to be able to get some context that the police officer could provide as an SRO, like we've talked about student rights, or about connecting up kind of criminal and civil liabilities with kind of like things that were happening in the student's life, or they came in specifically because there was a mental health crisis. So we'd have to be kind of like, I think the intent, Monica, that you're expressing is, can we make sure that we don't, and you use the key language, we don't leverage, we don't ask of, we don't require SROs to get engaged in a punitive aspect in escalating up the tiers right away. Whether or not there's some other intervention that can play that is completely agreed by most parties that it's about support and mentoring and coaching and relationship, and there is relationship there, that would have to be a key part. So I guess, and I don't know how to make it simple, so I'm going to sum it up this way. Schools are extremely dynamic. I think all parents, students, and staff know that. Everybody on this call knows that, because there's so many interactions and relationships happening in such a quick and fast and rapid pace, and so many people. So I guess people could misread someone's intent to live up to those clear delineated guidelines by trying to do a coaching and supportive model and see that maybe as a negative. And I don't know how one would adjudicate that without really having that clear demarcation between like kind of, punishment / kind of enforcement versus kind of like support. So anyways, it's complicated. Great question. Yes, I think it's a good idea.
I mean, I could respond back, but I'm not going to. I'm gonna hold it. Okay.
I see a hand. I see a hand by Equibit. You have your hand up?
Yes, I did. I got a couple of questions. One of them is, how long does it take for an event just to go from tier 1 to tier 3? Is there a window? Is there a day or two? Or is it within one day that they escalate from tier 1 to tier 3? That's one question. And the next question is, this is for Ms. Murphy. She mentioned about the 5150. And, I just want to know, who writes the 5150 and what are the rationale for the 5150 to be initiated?
Well, Blair, that's right up your alley. Do you want to take that first?
Yeah, I can start with that one. So when we're working with a student or someone on campus gets notified that a student is threatening to harm themselves or others, How that works is usually a counselor or admin, usually a counselor if possible, works with that student and tries to gather more information, see what, if they are truly in imminent danger of hurting themselves or someone else. And then at that point, we do have to call an officer, a police officer, to work with us from that. And then they go through and interview the student and try to gather more information. And they're the ones that then would place a student on a 5150 hold. And then at that point, they would transport them to, depending on if they're Kaiser or if they have other insurance, to be evaluated at like the crisis stabilization unit, or for Kaiser, I think they have a department within the emergency room, where they are then they are evaluated to see if they need to be hospitalized, or if they need extra support, and they will be released. Does that answer your question?
Yes, you did. Thank you.
Okay, and then there was another part of his, the tier part. Maybe an admin can speak to that, or?
How do we get the most quiet admin in the world tonight? That's rare.
I could speak to it. This is Jesse. My camera takes a little bit too long on. I think we're just trying to be respectful to the staff presentation, as we spoke a lot last time. But real quick, and not to add additional confusion, but because I hear a lot of the tier language and it gets a little complicated real quick, but I just kind of maybe clarify a little bit. When we talk about three tiers, three multi-tier system, it's really to coordinate programs and support. It's not really to label students, like you're a tier 1 student, you're tier 2, and a student can get multiple interventions at different levels, right? So what the idea is, like, what if you look at it, what are we doing for all students is tier 1, like what kind of universal practices that we're implementing across the board. If it's around kind of discipline, and this, what are we covering in our classrooms, for all students to understand. A tier 2 type of thing would be like small groups with students, right? Restorative practices, restorative circles, facilitation, like either conflict resolution, something like that. And then a tier 3 intervention is more for a student, right? When something's happened, that's sometimes when maybe you pull in a SRO, when a situation has happened, you need to in with that student, or it could be on the multiple things, but you could use a multi-tier system for many things that we use, including like attendance, for example. What are we doing for all students, some students, and so forth. So I didn't mean to complicate it more, but I just wanted to clarify, we don't use it to like label a student that you're a tier 1 or you're a tier 2 or you're a tier 3. Is how do we coordinate these services that students get?
So it seems like it's layers of service.
Well, and it's also, I think what Jesse's trying to point out, it's very fluid. There are, ideally, we would love to be only addressing, student behaviors minimally and always at tier 1. But there can be a lot of fluidity for what students need, depending on who the student is, what they're going through. If they've been experiencing a lot, if they've been triggered, probably more so now than ever, we have more students who, when they're not in school, they might be being hospitalized, and then they come back to school. In previous, maybe in our time when we were in school, students like that didn't come back to school. They went to alternative schools, or maybe didn't graduate. We're trying to hold more of our students who are experiencing diverse and challenging things in their lives, and keeping them on campus and giving them access to their education and their experiences. And for some of them, it can be very difficult, and we have to have as many resources as we can. And sometimes it does become about school safety. And when we talk about 5150s, oftentimes including an SRO in that is because we legitimately feel there is a danger And I think that Blair could probably speak to that too. I mean, this is when you are very worried about a student harming themselves, or even potentially harming somebody else and themselves. You know, the situation can become fairly dynamic, and then you move very quickly through multiple tiers, because maybe the teacher already tried some of the you know, things that they normally do with students, a quiet check-in, hey, come on outside, let me see how you're doing. Then it kind of escalates because something happens, and then they've got to call a campus supervisor, an administrator. And then the next thing you know, we're trying to call parents, and it's gotten to the point where maybe the student's going to bolt. And so then we're, you know, or they have bolted. So then we've got to find somebody who has the resources, typically the SRO, who can help us locate this student, and make sure that we can de-escalate that situation and the student can get the help that they need. So, you know, the tiers are kind of arbitrary structures that we work within, but they can be very, very fluid, and students can be accessing it at different levels, depending on what they need. But it's not really designed to be punitive. And I think that's what we have to keep separating and working on, that when a student, you know, gets upset and is throwing bad language around, or is maybe punching a locker, or is, you know, threatening to harm themselves, we don't want to necessarily make it about punitive, but we've got to address that student's needs in that moment, as well as the needs of everybody else around, because there's different levels of training, there's different levels of effect. And, you know, to tell you the truth, vicarious trauma is real. So when people are around this, you know, there's got to be a sense of how do we keep everybody safe, and how do we take care of everyone's needs, not just that student who might be, you know, really going through an intense moment, but how do we take care of the people around them so that they also feel safe?
Okay, thank you. Are there other parent questions? Those are great.
Yeah, Renee has her hand up.
Hi, I have statements and questions from a couple parents. So first, one states, I feel that I should trust and support the SRO program, but I have hesitation regarding giving absolute control, which police officers have in any given situation. The balance between civil judgment and legal judgment when dealing with youth and teenagers is critical. Decisions made in the moments of discord can escalate depending on the reactions made by the present authorities. While any relevant interactions should be documented appropriately, are SROs trained to de-escalate and discount potentially illegal situations in support of the student's potential, with school support to participate in a restorative justice program?
Is that directed toward the classified staff or administrators?
If either can answer.
I'd like to say something really fast. I can't answer that whole thing, but I can address one piece of it at least, that the SROs, in the way that they're trained, which I think at least we were presented on some of it, and the SROs can speak to it more, I'm sure, but their training is such, and they are on campus with our students. And that goes back to that, some of your question, your statement goes back to that familiarity between the SRO and the students, and just the de-escalation in itself is just that in itself a lot of times, or at least it can begin there. So I just wanted to say that much about that little piece of it.
And also, Renee, depending on the situation, there are kids that have a strong connection with me, and sometimes they might get in trouble with their math teacher. We all have that understanding. You know Johnny better than anyone else. We're going to send him to your room when he gets out of hand. And that works for us as well. So I know that he's coming over, there's an issue. I have a chair at my door. He or she can sit there until they cool down, and then they can tell me after class what is going on. And that makes that, so they don't have to go all the way up to the administrators. They can solve it at that level. Those are the basic ones. And also, a lot of times when I have problem with kids, we'll talk about it afterwards. If it's a persistent activity, then I'll say, you know, I think it's time your mom or your dad and I have a little chat. And 9 times out of 10, the kids will say, yeah. And you know, that one time that they say no, and I said, yeah, let's you and I both talk to him at the same time. So we, as educators in the classroom, we try to keep that down, squash it, as soon as we can so it doesn't escalate to an admin situation.
And does that happen when it's technically still something that would be illegal?
You know, that's a whole different question. Thank you. If they're in my room, let's say they're just ripping up paper or they're speaking out of turn, that's to me is minor. But if they have a knife in class and they're showing it and bragging, that's a whole different issue. I'll try to talk to them and take the knife, and I'll tell them, when your parents come to pick you up today, come to my room and get it. If not, it goes up, then I'll send it to the office and write a little write-up on what he or she was doing in class with the knife. So it depends on the severity.
Yeah, let me take a moment. This has come up twice now. And I want to harken back to one of our original presentations. Just a quick, I looked this up already, if you guys can see. This is from the police perspective on significant kind of interactions that they get involved in. And I couldn't find it quickly, but the education code requires police notification on certain kind of violations, like a selling of a drug offense, a certain weapon on campus, a potential assault. So there are examples, and I can't pull it up right now, of when administrators are required to bring something to an SRO or a police officer in general. Remember, that was under the context of, even if we didn't have an SRO program, we still have to make a referral legally to police officers in some regard. So I thought I'd just pop that up to kind of give a small indication of when SROs get involved. And any administrators need to add on to that perspective of moving on and when something becomes an SRO versus, let me see if Monica, let me see first if the administrator wants to step in on this.
Yeah, Steve, I would agree that we have a slippery, well, it can be a slippery slope if you start trying to make determinations on when you're not going to report, like for instance, a knife being shown around campus. That depending on the context, that may, I've had kids who it's a Friday and they're going camping and a huge buck knife falls out in the middle of class, because their dad's picking them, they're with mom during the week, dad's picking them up and they're going camping. That's very, very different than a kid pulling out a knife, let's say during break, and he's, kind of showing it to the kid that we know for the last month they haven't been getting along. And the reason that we do need to approach some of these things differently is because it comes down to a level of safety. And if we don't have very clear expectations for students about things that are potentially dangerous like that on campus, and something happens, then we didn't do our due diligence. We didn't follow through to the letter of what we should to make sure that students are supported. I'll stress again that, it's not intended to be a gotcha with our tiers of intervention and our levels of support when a student makes a bad decision. The intent is to keep them from making that error in judgment or that mistake later on, or in some way that could affect them. So I'll mirror what Steve said. There are times that we don't really have a choice. We need to pass that on to the next level for safety.
Monica, did you answer the question you had?
Okay, now I have two questions. Before Dr. Clissold started talking, I only had one, but now I have two. So my first question to Steve was whether or not those required reporting violations are documented and easily found for parents and students, like in the handbook, as to like, okay, yes, this is, because I know there's a whole bunch of things listed in there, like ed code and various different things, are the ones that are required reporting to the police clearly identifiable? That's question number one. And then question number two, in response to what Dr. Clissold was saying, I surely hope that in those two situations where one student, was going to be going camping and brought, and was in possession of a knife at school, and let's just say that student happened to be white, and another student had a knife on campus and had a different story for why they had it and happened to be Black, that both students would be treated exactly the same way for the violation of having a knife on campus. Thank you.
Yeah, I was just typing that, but you know, I could see one of my kids coming to school with a knife that they would use for something like that, but because their dad's not taking them hunting, they can't have that story. Whereas some kid that's wearing camo, he can have that story and then he gets away with it. I have a really hard time with that. That knife on campus is still just as big of a threat from whatever student it's from. So those kind of things are really hard for me.
Well, I would say that the consequence is still, the school level consequence is still the same, but the question was whether or not we would refer it to law enforcement. So I'm not talking about the application of a school level consequence, but whether or not it would reach the level of a legal, you know, those are I mean, even when we report it to police, we are still calling, contacting the parents. And if I were to have a parent come in and say, well, you know, we're aware that they have this and what have you, I would hope that we don't have parents coming in saying, you know, that parents are going to come in and not be partners with us. But there are some times where parents will come in and try and cover for their student. We have to assume good intentions, and that parents are, you know, coming in and saying and being truthful with us that if their son or daughter is carrying a weapon, that they're being honest with us that, you know, are we both concerned about it? Are we you know, or was there some sort of reason? I mean, I have a concern that any student is carrying a knife to campus, honestly. You know, even if there is a camping trip, all I'm relaying is some of the stories that I've heard. I'm not saying that the consequences aren't going to be similar. I'm just saying that in terms of referencing it to a police officer to also look in on it. And just because we bring a police officer on it does not mean that a student's going to be arrested, that there's going to be a citation. It means that there is a consultation and we are bringing somebody else in on it. So I want to be really clear that we don't make too many assumptions that, you know, we're not being consistent. I agree, you have to be consistent, regardless of who the student is or the reason that they have it, because when you get right down to brass tacks, it's still a weapon on campus. So I probably need to be a little bit more clear with that. And I couldn't agree more that we need to be consistent and transparent. So, but I would 100% agree with that.
Renee, you have your hand up?
So I do have another question from another parent, but just that you are referring one to the police and the other not to the police, that's really difficult to me. And that's when children of color get in more trouble and end up in the justice system at a disproportionate rate than the white kids do. And so that's part of the problem of having the police in schools. But here's another question from a parent.
Well, Renee, I just want to be clear that we are consistent. And what I'm saying is, as you move to a high level, and in that case, having a weapon on campus is severe, that we're partnering with parents, and there is a possibility that referral could go to the SRO. Now, the SROs can speak probably more eloquently on how they address that on campus if an administrator refers a weapon on campus. But as far as that is still a violation of Ed Code, there is still the possibilities within our tiers of intervention as to what happens when somebody is found in possession of that, and what happens at the first offense, the second offense, and the third offense. And you know, that is something that is pretty well written into our tiers of intervention when it comes to violations of Ed Code.
And Renee, I should have elaborated, if I see a knife, I've yet to see one, I would write up and then send it to the main office. So I didn't make that perfectly clear, but I would.
Okay, Renee,
And
go
Renee,
ahead.
I just want to say personally, like, I share your concerns, like hugely share your concerns. And I'm just saying it with regards to what we're talking about right now, I don't see that happening. Like, that could happen, and I could see the room for it to happen, and I could see, you know, if it wasn't consistent, but I do see the consistency. But I just mostly wanted to say that I share your concerns.
Okay. Renee, did you get a chance to, was that the question from the parent that you referred to? And I want to just bring us back. These are questions for staff at this point. Thank you.
Okay. It is similar to what we asked the admins last week of our SROs. Oh, are the SROs the best people to provide the missing support? Would be in many areas the socially, mentally, academically, crime deterrent, or home support. So that quote was from the staff response. And of what would be missing, we asked the admins last week if SRO are the best people to provide the mental and emotional support, or if money wasn't an object, would there be other supports that you would want instead of the SROs?
I could speak to that. Yes, if money was not an object, we'd take a lot more counselors and, school-based therapists and lots of other supports. But of course, money is an object. But I feel like we could definitely use more mental health support, but I see that as a different role than the SROs. I mean, I don't see them taking on the social emotional, except to be maybe a support to students that they have connected with. As far as the 5150s, that's the law. I mean, they are the ones that are able to put a student on a 5150 hold, and we can't transport. So either they have to transport or the parent does. But usually for safety reasons, the police end up transporting students. Anybody else want to add?
And Gabe, I see your hand up, so give me a moment. Let this question go out and I'll let you respond. Okay. Any other staff?
Oh, sorry.
In training, I was informed that the SROs have special training that a general policeman might not have. So there are some qualities of having them on campus. But as Blair said, give me a nurse, give me a psychologist, give me the healthcare as a whole. That would definitely work for us if money was not an issue. So yes, I agree with you on that stage.
Very good.
And I couldn't concur more with all of that. We could use so much more support in so many ways. And an SRO, they're different roles. So it's a different, they're different broader categories, really. It is though that if we lost an SRO, that would be one less access of support for our students and for us. That is clear. And yeah, but much more support. We could use a lot more support.
All right, Mr. Alpavera, do you have this? You want to hit a topic here, or was this something that Renee was asking?
Yeah, I wanted to double back on the comment that Dr. Clissold in regards to the example that she gave. And I want to double back because I think what got lost in the conversation was the brandishing as opposed to having possession. And it doesn't matter what color the student is. If they're brandishing, that is a violation of 48.915. That is, in theory, after investigation, if it's found that way, that is a mandatory expulsion, and it is a report to law enforcement. Doesn't matter what color it is. If you're brandishing and you're threatening a student, their safety with a weapon, 48.915. Now, the nuances, they do occur, absolutely. And doesn't matter if it's camping. I had a student one time who whittles wood, and after investigating and after talking to parents and figuring it out, that's what he does. And he brought these knives on campus. I just didn't want it to be able to that specific example to get lost in the fact that doesn't matter what color. If you brandish a weapon, 48.915 specifically says, after an investigative, as an administrator, after we investigate, and if that is what has occurred, not only is it a mandatory request for an expulsion, but it's also bringing in law enforcement to do an arrest and cite them out. So anyways, I just wanted to make that clear because I didn't want it to get lost that, you know, just because a student is of color as opposed to a student of non-color, trust me, I got a lot of Latino students that like to go camping, and they do also have knives.
Are there other questions from parents? Because we'd like to give the students an opportunity to ask some questions too.
I'll just ask one more because a parent provided it, and then we can probably move on. First, it's that we wanted to know if there's SROs on the campus of each of the staff members that are here participating. And then based on your experiences as staff, has students' behavior increased during the last couple years, like gotten any worse during the last couple years? Do you see any difference?
Renee, I'm at Rincon Valley Middle School, and last year we had Officer Jones on our campus, and he, along with the PAS, would come into my classes and talk with my students. And sometimes they'd walk around campus as well, and the kids would cater to them and talk to them about a variety of subjects. So there was it wasn't any escalation from last year to this year. I can go back 5 years and it's been calm. There's new things out there. The vaping is the newest thing. And of course, unfortunately, we have kids that try it. That's the only hype in the offenses that the students are performing. But when he's on campus, he's like the best VIP person, and they walk around and chat with him. Did I answer? Renee, is that the
Certainly.
area in which you were going?
Yeah.
Thanks.
I can
Any
speak
other
a
staff?
little bit.
Yeah.
So I work at Slater Middle School. This is my second year there, but I worked at Santa Rosa High School for 13 years. So at Santa Rosa High School, I worked with 3 different school resource officers there. And then at the middle schools, they're part-time. So they usually get shared with a high school. So they're not as visible and around as often at the middle school. And what I would say about, I can mostly speak to mental health. There's a huge mental health crisis in this country amongst our youth. So I've seen a huge increase in that. And yeah, having to call the police, SROs for 5150 to evaluate a student has definitely gotten much more common in the past couple of years, the past 5 years, something like that.
I'd say I've worked at Santa Rosa High School for probably close to as long as Blair. I've seen 3 different SROs as well. And I'd say I haven't seen an increase in the use of SROs as far as violations or things like that. I've seen an increase in, and you had some other way of saying it, an increase in problem behaviors maybe. I'm not sure what you said at the end, I'm sorry. But I feel like I have seen a lot more of what Blair referenced, which is the mental health, like substantially. And I've also seen maybe tied together, or sort of I picture it tied together at least, is a lot more, drug use as far as things that are easily accessible to the kids, the vaping and the use of, edibles and things like that, which I think in my mind oftentimes is part of the mental health issue. Mm-hmm. And as far as using the SROs, I feel like I know that I personally, with our admin team, have leaned on them a lot more as far as home support, going to, we don't have truancy officers. So they go check to see if the health and safety, if the kids are okay, or what the kids may have just, confessed to someone happened last night at home. Those kinds of things I've seen on the rise quite a bit. And we do use our SROs for that, or I have.
Any other staff want to add to the question? Okay. Okay, very good.
So
all right,
Steve,
I lost track. You're keeping track better than I am.
Steve, I have a confession. So you might have noticed that we were talking about the admin, and then we skipped the students for the admin, the SRO, and the board. However, it's serendipitous because we had the admin and the staff go first because they're in the school together. So the way it's working out is you see the admin and the staff jumping in sometimes to questions. We didn't plan it that way, I'm going to confess that, but I think it's working pretty well. So right now, it's the students' turn, and let's have the students first ask the administrators, because I skipped that part, and then the students go to the staff, and we'll use that method going forward for tonight. Confession.
Thank you. 2 Hail Marys. Omar, you are representing.
Yes. So I actually don't have any questions for admin. I did have a couple, but they were answered earlier, so I'm good on that end. And right now with staff, there's a lot of good questions from parents. A lot of my questions were also answered. The only question I have left at this point would be, or is that staff brought up a lot of good long-term solutions for reforming the SRO program, but what would be some immediate action you want to be taken, or you want to see taken right now to start things off?
That was for staff, right, Omar?
Yes.
Yes.
Well, I mean, I would say let's start, if we were going to keep the SRO program, start these things right now, like start them now. I mean, Omar, like that's simple. Don't go back to what we had. Let's take what we create here, if we're going to keep them, and implement it now.
And then Omar, I would add that
Right, I agree. I would say that not waiting a month of Sundays to take action and implement these things now, so that when students return, we're ready to go. That would be what I would want to see the most, is to really get things on track so that we can be ready and we're not behind the 8 ball.
And I would add, inform the students and the parents now, as we step forward, the responsibilities of the SROs and where they come in on school campus, what has to happen for them to take a lead role. So we would know that, the parents would know that. Teachers and staff, we know when they're going to be taking the lead, but a lot of the students don't know, and a lot of the parents. So if you know that you bring a machete to school, SROs are going to be called in, versus bringing an ink pen and a pencil, they're not going to be called. So informing ahead of time.
I also think that our idea of continuing with committees, so that we're having ongoing conversations about what's working and what's not working, both at the sites and I think as a district, that could go, right from the beginning, and we're having these discussions about what we can implement and how we can better work together.
Very good. So anyone else of the staff, anything you want to say further?
I mean, I want to add one more thing to that, Omar, just after Blair, which is we need, like the admin on each site, we need support from the board and from the district office. Like this can't be done in a bubble or in a, it has to start from the top and work down. Everything that's ever been changed in Santa Rosa City Schools starts from the top and works down.
Okay.
Omar, any other questions?
No, not at this time. And thank you for your answers. I really did appreciate them. And they were very good answers.
Steve, are there any other students? Omar, or are you the only student
No,
today?
Christina wasn't able to make it today. She'd emailed me right before, and just to let parents know, we call students every Monday afternoon and Tuesday. Really encourage them and trying to get them to in there, and that's that. Okay.
So then if there are no more questions from the students, the SROs are up next. And SROs, why don't we have you start with administration first? And then after that, we will have you go to staff.
Lori has a hand up. Lori?
I'll go after the SROs.
Okay.
All right, let me see if I can find my sheet. Just have to get out of the. Okay, the first question that we had for the admin is, what would the oversight committee look like?
Gabe, do you want to kind of be our de facto speaker again, as you were last time?
I appreciate the nomination, Tim. Thank you.
Trust in you.
Well, and I'll let the team, I mean, we obviously didn't get into specific details, but just off the top of my head, and one of the things that we had discussed was, for example, at LC, we would, it would be a committee of, a safety committee of parents, students, obviously SRO, staff, obviously administration as well. I think for us, that would be what would work for LC Allen, and that committee can not only get the information from the committee, but also distribute it to the different stakeholders on campus, so school site council, the staff as a whole, ELAC, and just kind of give a brief annual kind of report as to not just the SRO work, but just safety as a whole on campus, with the SRO program being a part of that. And I don't know if anybody has anything else that they thought about for their sites.
Gabe, let me just add, are you thinking like that could go into the school site safety report, safety plan? We can have, so that's an annual process, gets reported to the school site, goes to the board,
Goes
right?
to the board, and then can I mean, one of the things that we've been talking about now as an example is, at least at LC Allen, is you know, this whole colors, right? The GAN colors, that's part of the changing of dress code. That could be part of that safety committee as well. And obviously SRO on campus has also a pulse of the campus, would be able to contribute to that discussion.
Perfect, thank you. I was just gonna add, if, and I think Steve stole my thunder, if we could add that to the existing safety committee, just to branch it out. All right.
Tommy, hold on just a second. Was there a staff response? I thought there was a staff response to your first question. Maybe we could do both admin and staff if there are responses. If not,
I don't have anything to add, except I didn't hear a lot about having students on those committees too. I think my ideas were early on, like having students even be on the hiring committee for, you know, that committee being on the hiring committee when we hire the SROs for each site. You know, students' involvement, I think, is, in my mind, is critical here.
And Lynette, I think that's absolutely something that can be done. We discussed it this last testing process. We just ran out of time, and basically our application board, our OR board, ended up growing so large, and with it having to be done via Zoom, it became very difficult with the disconnection from COVID. I guess my next question to admin, and then this would go for staff as well. We've kind of touched on it, but I guess what we're looking for is, how would you handle situations on campus if SROs were not around?
Well, I think we articulated that on our end as administration. It would be, obviously, if it is a situation where law enforcement would need to be called in, it would have to be a call to dispatch and play the waiting game. And obviously, if it's a real emergency, our expectation and our hope is that law enforcement can get there immediately. But again, you know, if it's something that is obviously not as a high priority, you know, usually what has been done before when there's no resource officer and we know that there's a weapon on campus and it was a threat, now we can't have that citation there. We'd probably have to send the student home with their families and then have law enforcement go to the house and probably give a citation there. I mean, that's just one example, but I think that would probably be the recourse that we would have to do. And again, not knowing which law enforcement officer would be presenting the citation, what that could cause when they go to the house, as opposed to giving a citation on a campus with the family there. Yeah, that would probably be what we would have to do.
And just to clarify that, so understand Santa Rosa is 50 square miles, and during daytime hours, you normally have anywhere from 10 to 12 officers on scene. So that completely gets to the point of prioritization, like you mentioned. My other fear is if you have a kid that you have for potentially a criminal act, at that point, if you release him back to a home environment, you know, we're starting to lose best evidence and statements to where, you know, our follow through is going to be very difficult. My next question is, staff have any questions to that?
No, Tom, if the situation called for SRO, we have sent them to the administrators anyway.
Okay.
So
and then would they just sit there until an officer became available if no SROs were available?
if they were not available, we would remove them from our classroom. So we'd call an admin to come and pick them up, or the student on campus, student leader on campus to come and pick them up and take them to the office.
Okay. And then this kind of dovetails into that same question, ma'am, is what is the protocol for actually searching students on campus if they are believed to be in possession of a weapon, whether it's a knife or a firearm?
Well, for us as administrators, we're the ones who do the searching. Obviously, if we don't let teachers do the searching, we don't let campus supervisors do the searching, it's all on administrators. Obviously, once and if we find something that is, you know, a violation of not only obviously ed code, but a violation of the law, then that's when we would bring in law enforcement. Law enforcement, if it's on campus, it's on us. If it's outside of campus, maybe there's a situation at the park, then that's where law enforcement would have more authority than we would, and we wouldn't deal with that part of it. Now, granted, if it was something that stemmed from the school, that's a different conversation. But as it relates to on campus, whether it be locker, cars, possessions, backpacks, that would fall under us as administration to do the searches. And no, we don't do the searches with SROs. It's us doing the work as administrators, working as team. Well, again, that's a high school. Middle school there's only 2 administrators, and elementary is even less. So it just varies from each level of education.
Okay. And then, Gabe, it sounds like you're taking the brunt of these. Sorry. What modifications would you make, or would the administrators and staff make to the SRO program if it was to maintain, and why?
I think, again, we articulated this before. I think having them 5 days a week was one of the things that we talked about. I think we also talked about, again, being part of this committee, oversight safety committee, whatever we end up calling it. I don't know, team, help me out. Is there anything else? I know I'm missing a few other things that we talked about, but I can't think off the top of my head. Yeah, Val?
Also, like participating in restorative practice training, MOT, if we went to Museum of Tolerance, and any trainings that we could participate with SROs, we would welcome that too. So being partners.
I think we all talked about it, you know, using them as teaching experiences in the classroom. I mean, all of those things that we've gone over several times, I think we all, you know, had a lot of consistency in what we said, it seemed like.
Just going to add, that's question 6, answer C on our part. We also wrote some additional comments on that.
And I think answering to as an as an elementary school principal and now a middle school principal, having the SROs do some more with the elementary. Like I said, I loved the great program when I was involved in the elementary schools and doing some more educational pieces in the middle school to do more of that preventative, education curriculum would be amazing.
Yeah, and man, we'd like to continue that program with GREAT. Part of the problems that we have is the lead role in the GREAT program are the SROs. And then we fall into a catch-22 where the high schools want to have the SROs on campus more, but now we're taking the SROs off of campus to go to either the middle schools to handle calls, but then we're also taking them down to the elementary schools. I was one of the founders of GREAT along with Chief Navarro and Captain Cregan, and I can tell you the program was phenomenal. We attempted to grow it with officers and sending them to the 2-week trainings specifically to grow that program in the elementary schools. The problem that we ran into was the support and the backing of it. But I 100% agree. I'm a huge fan of having the officers on campus, and I'd almost like to include something similar to that effect of not necessarily the GREAT program, but being able to have that question and answer of the SROs in any of the classes, especially in the high school. Because I think once we start breaking down those walls and having that open dialogue, we tend to grow that relationship.
Tommy, that sounds like a great point to add to your presentation when it's time. Let's continue on with our questions for staff or admin, please.
All right, admin, when training is involved, can the SROs and admin overlap training where admin attend SRO training and SROs train with the admin and to include with staff?
Yeah, I don't see a problem with that. I think it would help us not only understand the SRO's perspective, but at the same time, I think, again, much like we wanted SROs to work with us and be elbow partners, I think it would be appropriate for that. Unless an admin has a different response.
I think staff would definitely welcome that as well. I think that's a great idea.
What training specifically that you guys may have could we benefit from?
Oh, geez, restorative, unconscious bias. What else am I thinking of?
Trauma-informed care.
Trauma-informed care.
You're on campus.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, all of it. Fire drills, for that matter. I mean, all of it.
Outstanding.
I mean, I think especially, and I know I've had AJ's over here, has done active shooter little workshops within our staff and have gone to other staff. Incredible, informative, and again, those are the type of relationships and those are the type of work that we could be doing together.
And would the administrators be open to host active shooter training for staff and admin as a whole?
We did at Santa Rosa High School. Officer Crosby held active shooter trainings with us.
And we did also at LCL.
Actually, I think most of the schools, I know I was at the elementary level, and I know Officer Boyd came and did training with us.
Sorry, I should clarify. I don't mean just the assembly ones. I mean to where we do live enactments, where we do training enactments of a campus-wide active shooters, where we're addressing classrooms, we're addressing how teachers and staff would respond along with admin. One thing that we found was the great communication between admin and SROs currently on campus, and to trickle that down to staff and the teachers. Is that something campus-wide on training days that you guys would consider?
I think that's more of a Steve Mazzara question.
Unless it's a violation of policies, I think as the research I've seen, as long as it's not involved with students, if you're talking about just the staff side of it and the organizational and logistical side of that. That kind of trauma, as I understand it, is not necessarily needed for good participation as long as the staff, classified and certificated, are highly trained. And if that's what you're talking about, we've certainly done those in the past.
And if I could just piggyback on that, on the sense that those type of trainings also do create a lot of trauma for our staff. And so we have to take that into consideration as well. And so it would have to be something that could not be just a one-day type of thing. I think it would have to be something that had some education behind it, and some supports behind it, because staff do get really triggered by situations, and thinking of an active shooter on campus is, I'm preaching to the choir, but as you all well know.
Correct. And I think that's where we'd want to try to do it over the summer, obviously not including students, but to bring the whole package to the schools, to where the first time they may experience or see this isn't the potentially of when it could happen.
How many more questions? I'm hoping that we would give the board an opportunity to ask questions tonight. We have about 20 more minutes.
I am done.
Okay, great.
Lori does have her hand up. There you go, Lori.
So here's my questions. A little different than the questions you've been asking, and I think this is what the full board will be asking when we bring this back. So as we began this journey, with the premise that many youth of color are being oppressed by police, and then questioning the presence of police at their schools and how that made them feel, where are we addressing, where are we really addressing in our schools that some kids, I don't know how many, I didn't know who they were either, do not see police on campus as providing safety for them. We seem to assume that our SROs are everyone's friend, that kids are flocking to them, that we're good with them and all kids are good with them. But what about those that we don't see, for whom police do not engender that friend vibe and may engender other types of emotional responses?
Is that a question for admin?
I think that's a question for admin and staff both. Actually, yeah.
I mean, I have one suggestion. I think that's I think that's the crux of this, a lot of this. But one tiny suggestion is one of the things we've talked about before, which is that, accountability, where all students and staff for that matter get to participate in talking about or critiquing or making a grade of their SRO. And that alone could make the idea that you have an SRO, this is your SRO, do you have how do you feel about that SRO? That could be a safe place to have those kind of conversations begin.
I think it would also help if we had the committee and it had students on it and students of color, and we were just more open about, maybe debriefing after situations happen. And also I think just students and parents and staff, everyone being clearer on the role, so that they know what the role is. And I think all of that will help, but that is what has come up over and over for the staff, is we want to make sure that our students feel safe and comfortable at school. So if they don't feel safe and comfortable at school with an officer, what can we do to help them feel more comfortable and safe? That's what we've been struggling with too.
And to kind of piggyback on what Blair just said, in our presentation, we suggested that we bring them into the classroom so that they can answer questions, and bringing them in to students that would maybe feel more fearful, the more often you see them and are able to communicate and interact with them, I think that would have a positive impact, so that they see them around as part of the school and they become kind of the fabric of the school, and they're not kind of an add-on or an extra. They become somebody that they see every day that they can interact with, and as they see them more often, they will feel more comfortable. And if not, then of course, when we're doing our check-in with the students of, this is your SRO and what is your interaction, that's an opportunity for them to anonymously say, you know, it gives me anxiety when I see them do this or that, or when they, you know, whatever it may be. But bringing them into the classrooms more often so they can answer questions and be more interactive with the students is definitely a way to address that.
So I'm going to say that everybody's got great intentions here, and I super appreciate that. But it's kind of like a story. I'll just tell a story about myself. As a teacher, I used to say, well, go find a quiet place, go into your room so you can do your homework. Well, I was talking to half my kids who didn't have their own room, didn't have their own desk, didn't have a quiet place. Yet I was blind to that. I was blind to that, and I am embarrassed to say that happened for too long of a time. So I think really what we're talking about is, as we can where I see us going is kind of, okay, we should redo the MOU or talk about structure, but we still need to really, really talk about what we are blind to. What and how do we know what we don't know? How do we see what we can't see? And so I want to keep putting that out in front of us, because those are the questions that the board will ask, the entire board will ask come September. Or
Well, I have a question. If anyone has any ideas, President Fong, if you do, agree. What can we not see because it's right in front of our face, and that's not something that we're familiar with?
So I think the reason why we're trying very, very hard to get a lot of student input is for just this, that we need to hear from our students, and everyone from their perspective is trying very hard. And I said, I appreciate that. So what we're going to hear from our students when we get these surveys back, and it takes time to get the surveys back from kids, will be helpful to us.
Trustee Dela Cruz, you've had your hand up.
I guess my question for admin and staff is really, how are you going to contextualize the events in our nation and in our town in an educational way that's not going to trigger or re-traumatize kids before you introduce a police officer into their educational experience? So what is the educational context that also requires a deep amount of emotional intelligence and understanding about the trauma that children of color feel when they see a police officer, and especially now more so than probably ever before in our time that I've been alive. So I really want to know, what is the educational and emotional process that you are going to undertake to support our kids to even be able to be in a classroom with a police officer and not immediately shut down? I just want to tell you, as a woman of color with the experiences that I've had with police officers in my life, when I was hearing you say that you were going to bring a police officer into the classroom as the first step in kind of introducing this idea, I felt emotionally triggered. I'm a 44-year-old woman who's been through therapy for the trauma that I've experienced, right? And I still want to tell you that actually my heart started to pound a little bit when I thought about being in a room with a police officer without really taking some of those initial steps to work through past trauma before I could even be in a place to have an educational experience. And so, I share that, probably TMI, but that's what we're here for, right? I share that because I do want to hear what is the pre-work that our district is going to ensure will happen before you can even get to the one-on-one with students and police to kind of introduce and recreate a relationship. Because I think, and this kind of goes to Lori's point, how are we truly understanding what our kids are living and going through? How are we listening to the kids who don't tell you, right? Who can't tell you, who don't have those words yet? because they haven't had access to therapy, right? How are we doing that work? Like, what is the context that you're creating to even make it possible for kids to have this conversation?
I mean, I'm just gonna say, I honestly had that, not the same, but I had a reaction similar, thinking about a police officer walking in the classroom, and I work with those police officers and I love them. You know, for the ones, my SROs, just saying I really appreciate them, but I did too. I get, and I think my idea is that's what this is for, or at least one of the things we're here for is to figure that out, because I don't think that the admin at my school or the admin at that school, we can't do it alone. We need you. You know, we need this group to say, you know, no, that's too much, or no, that all of it, just exactly what you said. I think that's what we're here for. At least that's what I heard.
I also want to note, Director Sheffield has his hand up also, if you'd like to put in your questions.
Thank you. Well, I think that Director Fong and Director De La Cruz was sort of giving this committee a sense of what and how the board is going to view this issue, trying to put it forward in sort of the lens that we are wanting to see this discussion through, because this was the reason why we created the ad hoc committee, was to give this perspective. In some instances, maybe we're not getting the full picture because we're still waiting to hear back from the student voices, which I think is really, really important, because I think, you know, as Director De La Cruz brought up, the response to the reaction when it was suggested to bring officers into the classroom to see a part, let the students see them as a part of the school community, when I think the reality is that students of color see officers in their day-to-day life as part of their own community, and it might be different than the experiences that they could receive on campus. So it's really important that we take that into consideration, and that all of you know that this is sort of will be where the discussion is steered to when it comes to the full board. I had a question for staff, and it sort of relates to the reaction that some students might have of seeing an officer on campus. It was mentioned early in the evening that staff would feel less safe without SROs, and that they should be clearly identified in uniform. And I'm wondering if staff can share with us what that discussion was and why, or the rationale behind this preference of having them in uniform. And then there's a second part of that. Does that include with guns, with weapons? Was that discussed?
Ed, let me answer the first part about bringing policemen into the classroom. I teach American history, and we talk about the Constitution and basic human rights and the amendments. And I've been doing this for at least 10 years, if not longer, bringing the SRO officer into my classroom and letting him explain to the kids their basic human rights. I do have students of color in my classroom. I've yet to have a kid that will say, King Clay, he's making me nervous. Male or female, I work with my students to let them see, you know, in every profession we have, there's the negative side and there's a positive side. We have great doctors. We have doctors who need some help. We have fantastic lawyers. We need some that are not as fantastic. So in that circle of the SROs or policemen as general, I let them know, hey, there's some good and there's some bad. So we need to start teaching, I shouldn't say teaching, we should start letting our kids know, yeah, you're gonna run into some bad people and you're gonna run into some good people as well. But society has kids of color, society, and whomever's in that has messed it up for the younger kids. Now they're becoming young adults, and we see all this stuff that's going on in the news. We need to do something on the positive side to help our kids understand the goodness and the badness. And if we don't do it now, when do we do it?
Yeah, no, and I agree with you, Ola, completely. I just, you know, with all respect, I would want to hear more from the student perspective. I mean, when I was a kid, I had a pretty good poker face, you know, and it was mostly because it's a defense mechanism. It's how we protect ourselves, especially around our peers, our fellow classmates. We don't want to show vulnerability, and it's something that you learn, you know, and for those of you who are not people of color, it's something that you learn early on, that you don't show vulnerability, you don't show a weakness, especially when you are terrified, when you're, and so I again, this is where we're getting the student surveys will really help us out, give us a better picture. And I thank you so much, Ola, for your response. I had a second and one final question. So much of the discussion was around mental health and mental health training. I will put some of those questions because there's been a lot of discussion already on it and it's late in the evening. But my question to staff, and I guess this would be to the administrators as well, is it your understanding that mental health support is defined in the scope of work requested from our SROs? Or is that just an unspoken given, an understanding that they would provide these services?
When it's a 5150 situation, then they have to be called because they're the only ones that can put the student on a hold. So if there's a concern that a student is possibly going to harm themselves or others, we pretty much have to call in an officer to.
And and this is my ignorance, I don't know, are officers the only mechanism that we have to deal with a 5150 case? And again, this isn't an ideal world that we live in. We deal with the resources that we have, and if we have the SROs, then that's who we use. But in our community, is it only officers that are called on, in our school community, only officers that are called upon in 5150 case?
We used to call on the CAPE program. That was a countywide program. But since then, the police department is who we call.
Thank you.
Okay, it's 7:58, and so we're nearing our ending time.
Can I interrupt him and articulate one thing, or should I just let it end?
Well, let me just hold on just a second, Tim. Do we have, if we have further questions from our board members, we can have an additional amount of time at the next meeting, and then we have the parents presenting, and then the students, and maybe Steve, you could update on the student survey at the same time, since that student viewpoint seems to be requested, and then the SROs. So that would be our planning for next time. And Tim, back to you.
There's a lot to cover, it sounds like, so I think it's just best if we maybe come to a close and let Steve say what he needs to.
Could you, Tim, maybe you could pick that up on the opening at the next meeting so we have continuity?
Sure.
And I would actually like at the beginning of next meeting to address the question from Director Alegria de la Cruz, because I think that's a very important question, not just as a site administrator, but also as a parent of a young lady who goes to Montgomery. So I would like to address that in our next meeting.
So it seems like
I would also like to make sure that we address Director Sheffield's question in full at the next meeting. I think that should be close to the front.
So I think the answer is there's some additional discussion between the committee and our trustees. I think it sounds like it's a yes. So that's where we would pick up the thread at the next meeting, and then have the parents and the school resource officers and the students ready for their presentation. So Steve, to you.
Yeah, so we're going to capture this. We'll capture, obviously Director Sheffield's questions are toward the end of that capture. So that'll be a place where we start off and we can roll right forward from there. I really appreciate the chat input. As I said, we're going to capture chats as well. So there's going to be a lot of transcripting that's going to happen in the next couple meetings. And again, that'll be strong for our reporting and our transparency of showing everybody really as we're getting to the point. I think we're really coming together and bringing a lot of these various strands of issues and kind of trying to put them in context. And I think it's been a wonderful conversation tonight. So I appreciate all that time.
We certainly hope that the transfer of information between all the parties is helping everyone sort of see the complexity and the dynamics of the topic of the ad hoc committee.
Very good. And I'm making a commitment. I'm going to try to get the transcript out before the weekend. So Friday, my secretary has to kind of book some time because that was a lot of time. That way you really have a chance to kind of go over the transcript and maybe dig into some final questions and go from there. Okay. All right. This is Labor Day weekend coming up. As I mentioned, I put in chat. We have 12,000 student surveys right now. We expect another 500 or 600 by the end of the week. I'm going to start crunching those numbers and try to have some demographic information for you as part of the student presentation for next time. And that'll be part of our presentation on the students information side. Okay. Okay, with that, it's 8:02. Do we have a sending off, Director Fong, or are we okay? Okay, I think she said we're okay. Thank you guys very much. We'll see you. Everyone have a good, safe, and enjoyable weekend, and we'll see you here next time.
Good night, everyone.
Thank you. Good night.
Thank you. Good night. Steve or Dr. McCarty, can I ask you a quick question?
Of course.
And it was more about the structure that we have. And I'm picking up something here. I think the last questions were really good questions for us, but that wasn't part of the 25 something questions. And we were trying to be very technical and addressing everything and due diligent. I just feel like at some point we need to come back as a group to flush that, because I think we do have ideas and solutions and maybe where we can start. And we hinted around it, like tier 1 approach, what does that mean, and get staff involvement and stuff like that. But that hasn't been necessarily the thrust of the questions and answers that we've been concentrating on. We've just been trying to do our part in addressing each group's questions as they come. I just feel, I don't know how I would have communicate that via email or in the chat room, but just maybe something to kind of bridge back when we come back on our next meeting or so on.
Hey, Jesse, here's the quick answer. The problem with the committee